Today on Questions, are pastors full of crap? Hey everybody, welcome to Questions. This is a series where we answer your questions on faith, spirituality, theology, philosophy, basically what does it mean to be human? And you can follow along with our little community at The Co-Mutual on Instagram, or you can keep watching videos on my YouTube channel at Brennan Johnson. And basically, you ask questions, we answer it. Probably less than satisfactory, but we are always taking questions and always trying to give answers. Let's get into it. The question for today is, too long for the question box. How do you answer the fact that pastors are often more liberal than their congregants, but have to preach things they don't necessarily believe in or risk being fired? I guess another way of saying this is to ask, how do churches tear down their expectations of their pastor? The idea that you can be a ruler as long as you cater to the people. If we could get over that, wouldn't churches have more open and authentic conversations? Yeah. I don't believe pastors should be put on a pedestal. I don't believe that pastors should be any more special than anyone else. I think when there is a power dynamic, and obviously there's most likely always going to be some form of power dynamic when you have a person in a position where they are speaking wisdom of some sort to a group of people. But when we put them on a specific kind of pedestal, when we put them too high and mighty, those power dynamics can become really, really toxic and dangerous, and a lot of the time bad things happen. When we think pastors can do no wrong, or we put pastors on pedestals, or we give pastors more weight to the things they say than those pastors deserve, bad things happen. But to the point of the question of, are pastors more liberal than their congregants, and thus have to preach things they don't believe, I read an article about 10 years ago, and I forget where, because again, it was like 10 years ago, but it said that the longer a person is in some form of higher education that is centered on theology, be it Bible school, seminary, getting your doctorate, the longer a person spends in higher education centered around theology, the more liberal, and the point of the article was liberal, that person is going to become, or most likely going to become, within reason. A conservative evangelical is most likely still going to be a conservative evangelical after going to Bible school and seminary and getting their doctorate. The difference is that they're just going to be a more liberal, conservative evangelical. You're not going to get the most conservative person in the world coming out of school and suddenly they're the most progressive Christian. Most likely. I mean, things happen. But that's what they're saying is, within reason, the longer someone spends in higher education, the more liberal they generally move. And not for any nefarious reason, but because the further into theology and the further into scripture people studied, more often than not, they found that the narrative arc, the purpose, the drive of Scripture moved them away from a lot of the petty squabbles that people find themselves in so much. These theology students were coming out of school going, it's really stupid to debate whether dancing is a sin or television is of the devil. That's not the question here. That's not the things we should be talking about if we're really going to get intellectually deep and spiritually deep into the Judeo-Christian scriptures. So the article went on to say that some pastors struggled because they after coming out of school and after getting jobs and all this stuff, they believed things that they knew would not be accepted by the churches if they spoke them aloud, that they would get fired if they tried to talk about the things that they actually believed. There are also stories and movies that have come out, in movies like The Diary of a Country Priest, or the one with Ethan Hawke, First Reformed, where it deals with priests and ministers having crises of faith. I think they're interesting things to look at, because what happens when a pastor not just believes things the congregation doesn't believe, but might not even believe in God anymore, because who does that pastor turn to? There was a story I heard, and I believe it was the philosopher and theologian Peter Rollins who told it originally, where I heard it. I think it's a true story. Allegedly, it's a true story. No, it's a true story. But basically, Peter Rollins told this story of a priest that basically was a priest to this small village his entire adult life. I want to say it was in France in the 1700s or 1800s, very long time ago, and he was greatly loved. When he finally died, the town was in mourning. It was this deep, deep sadness, because he was so beloved. He was so loved. The town just really, they all felt that he had done such a wonderful job shepherding them closer to God. And so when he died, they obviously they went through his things. They helped clear out his house, and they found his diaries, and they learned that about 5 years into his ministry, 5 years into being the priest for the town, he actually lost his faith. And so basically he wrote in his diary that he had no one to talk to. There was no one he could turn to. There was no one he could be counseled by, no one he could ask questions to. He was alone in this village with these people who expected him to be their guide and their leader in matters of divinity. And so, first and foremost, it's a tragic story, on the one hand, of what happens when ministers are on pedestals. When a minister feels like they can't share their struggles with the people in their community. When a pastor believes that they have to look or act or believe all the right things or do all the right things, it becomes a really isolating, hard place, and that pastor, that minister, that priest, whoever, is going to fail, because we're human. And so, yeah, it's a sad story in that regard, that this person felt for his entire adult life that there was no one he could turn to. But on the other hand, this pastor loved his community so much and knew his community so much that in writing in his journals, he said that he wasn't going to leave the church. He wasn't going to try and convince the church that God didn't exist, mainly because he knew that what they needed was God. He knew that even though he didn't believe in God, they needed to believe in God. Their belief in God was beneficial to them. It's kind of likened to the Karl Marx quote, which I might butcher. He famously said that Christianity was the opium of the masses, and people have used that either to criticize Karl Marx or to criticize Christianity. But the continuation of that quote goes, "Religion is the opium of the people. It is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of a soulless condition." And so what Karl Marx meant by that is that he didn't believe in religion, he didn't believe in God, he wasn't trying to lead people to Christ, but that religion, and more to the point Christianity, is important. When you are suffering, believing in a higher power brings relief. When we have the inclination to be heartless, there is a faith system put in the world that pushes us to have a heart. And so that's important. So even Karl Marx, who has been completely, criticized by religious people for hundreds of years now, even he understood, while he didn't believe in God, that God plays an important part. That sometimes believing in something bigger than yourself was important. But so that's what this priest living in, I think France, I think the 1700s, was doing, is he recognized that these people needed opium for their pain. They needed a sigh in their oppression. They needed a heart in their heartless situations. They needed a soul in their soulless situations. They needed God. So for the entirety of his adult life, he preached and he mentored and he spoke and he chatted and he had community and he had relationship with this village, leading them closer to Christ, so that by the time he died, this town mourned what a great pastor he had been, even though he didn't believe it himself. And I bring this up to say that this man, this priest, could have, right off the bat, the moment he lost his faith, stood up at the pulpit and gone, "I quit, I'm going." Or he could have stood up and said, "Hey, everybody, stop believing in God. This is stupid." Or he could have spent his entire adult life slowly trying to lay the groundwork of making his congregation lose their faith. Like, he could have tried to get these people to believe what he believed exactly the way he believed it. But instead, he had a pastor's heart. Even though he didn't believe in God, he had a pastor's heart in that he wanted to make these people and bring these people and help these people be better, be more assured, have more faith in the things that are good in this world and in this universe and in this reality. Ministers shouldn't seek to try and make their congregations just clones of themselves. And likewise, congregations shouldn't seek to do the same to their ministers. If a congregation is expecting the pastor to say exactly what they want to hear, they're never going to grow, they're never going to learn, because they're never going to be challenged, and vice versa. Some of the best moments of my life is when I have preached a sermon at church, or I've said something in a discussion or a study, and someone afterwards or during or at some point comes up and says that they were challenged by it and have things that prompted them, that the ideas and questions that were prompted by what I said, and then they tell it to me and I go, "Oh, that's really good. I need to think on that now." If I was just preaching what I wanted to hear, or if I was just speaking what I wanted to hear or what they wanted to hear, no one would be growing. You know, if I was trying to make them like me, we'd be a really crappy church. And if they were trying to make me like them, we'd be a really crappy church. You know, it's a cliche saying that, you know, I'm not going to say is copyrighted by the Christian church, but we need to major in the majors and minor in the minors. You know, if there's a huge difference between a pastor and a congregation to the point that the pastor thinks that they have to actively lie every time they get up to the pulpit, that pastor probably shouldn't be in that congregation. But if that pastor can recognize that maybe some of the things they believe don't need to be shared and aren't beneficial, then I don't think that is a huge problem. I don't share every single thing I believe. I share what I think is beneficial, not for me, but for the people I'm speaking to, and they have every right to challenge and question and talk and discuss and converse right back to me so that we can continually be working on each other. Far too often, we're quick to jump to conclusions and write off what doesn't kind of fit our box, you know? And again, there's place to not have someone in your life is that if the thing they believe, if the things they're saying are actively harmful or actively hateful, there's times and places where you shouldn't be around people who disagree with you. But if it's just minor stuff, again, majors and minors. If your life isn't significantly changed because that person over there doesn't believe exactly what you believe, then there's space to have a conversation. Because what you think, what you believe is not perfect. What I think, what I believe is not perfect. And the moment we think it is perfect, we're damned, we're doomed. We should always be trying to learn. We should always be trying to challenge ourselves. We should always be pushing to be better and think better and do better. And that means sometimes being challenged by people who think and do and believe different things than us. I think if we all did that, the world would be a better place. So, I hope that answered your question. I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much. If you have questions, you can always be asking us. Grace and peace. Cheers.